My name is Joe Stanislaw. How many of you were here last year at the event? Well, I spoke last year at the event. I walked all over the stage. I can't do that this year. They forced me to sit down. So I'm just going to sit down, and we're going to have a conversation this year. And we're very, very privileged to have Peter Voser, who's CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, with us for a conversation. He and I are going to have, I'm told, a hard talk conversation.
Yeah, let's do a hard talk.
We've never seen the program, but we're going to try and do it. And then we're going to do this for about 30 minutes and turn to you for discussion with you, the audience. And we've changed the game a bit because we think this is all about change. And we're leaving the lights on the whole time because we want you to be a part of the conversation the entire time we're talking to each other, because we're not actually talking to each other, we're talking to you in our conversation. And we want you to engage with us and not disappear on us in the dark when we can't see you. So it's meant to be lively. I won't be rude, but it'll be lively. And we have an important topic to talk about because we're talking about, is corporate entrepreneurialism alive in a big company, or is I guess the subtitle of this conversation is a pie in the sky, basically. And let me begin by making a few comments. Peter has been with Shell for 30 years with a 2 or 3 year disappearance to help correct ABB as CFO, which he did very, very effectively, is now back to Shell as CEO. Shell's not a new company. I'm not sure if you realize Shell started in 1860s, 70s, and it was not in the oil business. Shell was in the business of selling lanterns. And they needed to have something to put in the lanterns to burn to create light. They were in the light business. Now, they happen to be producing a lot of oil and gas right now, but they started basically in the Shell business and then the lantern business. So they have transformed themselves once or twice in the history of the company. And it's been around for a few years. And I don't think you stay around for a few years without having made some innovations and some changes to the organization and its culture both. Also, as a background comment, I think the university did a survey, St. Gallen, of who do you want to work for? And I think the majority of the students said large corporations. So that must mean all of you who want to be entrepreneurs think you have an opportunity in a large corporation. And we're going to hear either why or why not that's actually true, basically. And I'm going to call Peter a corporate man. He's been with Shell for over 30 years. I also want to declare on my cards, I've been with Shell longer. Shell created a fellowship at the University of Cambridge in the mid-1970s, and I was the first recipient of that fellowship. I wasn't an employee, I just happened to benefit from their generosity. I hope you don't now regret you did this.
No. Not now. Maybe in a half an hour it's different, but we'll see. So.
But I specifically call him a corporate person or a corporate man. I want you to think about that term as we're going through this conversation. And the challenge of a company for Shell is continuity and change. You have to have both. And does that mean you can or cannot have entrepreneurialism in a company? And another little piece of background is Shell's always been a maverick. Who's ever heard of scenario planning in this room? Put your hands up. Scenario planning. Shocking. Everyone's hand is not up. How many have actually done scenario planning in this room? A few hands. Shell created the technique. And when Shell did this, it was before the first oil crisis. And they did it, and they said, the world's about to change. The rest of the industry and the politicians who were told this story said, you guys are out of your mind. Where are you coming from? But they prepared for the change, and they survived it, where others had a hard time going through what they called the rapids along the way. Shell's also had an experience that's life-changing with the Brent Spar incident in the North Sea, which caused a trauma to the culture in the organization in the 1980s. That's not being a maverick. They just happen to have an accident. But you have to deal with those accidents. And that affects culture. It affects risk-taking, entrepreneurialism. And there's just some, I'm putting these there as a background because that affected the culture of the company for a decade or more, which he is now turning around and changing as we still go through that. So that's just some background for this to have our conversation. I'm just going to start off by saying, is there such a thing as entrepreneurialism in a large firm like Shell? And do you call it entrepreneurialism, or do you call it something else?
Yeah, first of all, good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to be back here in St. Gallen at the symposium. We don't call it actually entrepreneurialism. We call it creative minds, innovative minds. That's what we are looking for. And that's how we are actually recruiting and have been recruiting all the time. And I think innovation keeps us alive. If we actually don't drive technology, R&D, and innovation into our businesses, we would not have survived the many changes in our industry. And just by the way, on the scenario planning, we just did our ones again in 06, 07, and we have actually been forecasting quite significant change in our 2 scenarios which we are developing. And I have to say, so far, they have been pretty much spot on. So I think you need to manage innovation, you need to manage the creative minds in order to push the company forward. But also, let me be clear, you also need operational people who actually do day in, day out their job by just running in big corporations like we are, their bits of the operations in not a too creative way. They run it and they actually deliver. And so you need to manage both things in corporations like Shell, where most of our businesses which we have, business units, they would most probably make the FTSE 20. So these are not small businesses.
Let me take that question a little bit further. You hire for leadership, management, entrepreneurialism. Are all 3 of those embedded in the same person, or are they often not in the same person? And how do you identify those 3 things? Leadership, management, keeping the trains on the track, and entrepreneurship. How would you define those if you're looking at someone in this audience, which could be me, or it could be someone in their mid-20s? And how would you say, what are those characteristics you're looking for when you talk to somebody?
I think at the end, you need all of them. When I look at graduate recruitment, we very much go for the creative and the innovative minds. We have obviously a large other recruitment base which we need to push through in many areas, and there we do distinguish a little bit more. So in our assessment centers, actually, we are testing people for all these elements, but for the high end of the recruitment which we are doing, we are pretty much looking for the creative, innovative minds who actually we think can develop the right risk management skills as well, because this is at the end of the day, when you develop 30, 40 years kind of projects like we do, you need to bring the innovation, the creative mindset, and the risk management together, and a person needs to manage that pretty well.
How do you differentiate what I call the disruptive mind, which has very good ideas, but disruptive, and the creative mind? Because they're very close.
They're very close, and you need both. And you need to manage both. Because if you actually stifle the disruptive minds too early, you may actually miss out on the big breakthroughs. So you need to have structures in place in the company where both actually can flourish, but in such a way that they're actually stopped at the right time, because disruption can also be value destroying. And I think that's where you need to have mechanisms, short decision lines, short communication lines in order to actually manage that.
If I'm a disruptive mind, but a very creative one, obviously, do you have different metrics to reward me from the person who's going to be the train driver, keeping the train on the tracks? Are they the same metrics, same reward structures, or are there different incentivization?
Yeah, we had long discussions about that in the past few years, because we had a period in earlier this decade where the very different objective settings, scorecard and remuneration packages drove the company in different directions. So actually what we did, we brought everything together into one scorecard for the whole organization, so for both minds. And we have adjusted our leadership training, our leadership processes, and our target setting in such a way that we can actually then, not in the reward structure, but in other areas, we can manage the various type of leaders and employees which we have.
In the old Shell, I'm going to call it, in the 70s and 80s, you pick people out of the crop, usually the top 1 or 2 or 3%. You put them in a position for 2 or 3 years. Then they go to a certain country to get some managerial experience. After 3 years, move to another country for 3 years. Are you still doing that rotation system? Or can you actually take the entrepreneur and move them around in terms of a bureaucratic drive towards the top? Or do you create a different structure for them to try and release the potential they actually have?
I think a little bit of both, but let me take you through the two sides. We still have the system where we actually move people across the world on a frequent basis. The assignments are a little bit longer because we also had to learn that if you only go 2-3 years, you actually never see things to the end. So your own you get to a point where you are dissatisfied that you are never accountable for something, and that you need to, in your life, you need to actually go through that. So we still have that. We have 7,500 people, which they rotate on a permanent basis across the world. But then on the other side, we had to come up with something in order where the very creative, disruptive minds on the R&D side, that we can capture them in a different way. So we actually, what we did, we named 7 chief scientists across the whole of the Shell group. So they are in their domain. So one is chemicals and catalysts, for example. You have another one on upstream technologies. And what we did, we have actually given them then the empowerment to form cross-company teams with the brightest minds in Shell, so that they can actually drive them very specific projects or technologies. So we bring them together in a different form, so they do not have to go out and transfer around the world, so that we can actually leverage their minds together in order to get to the new groundbreaking technologies. And that works very well. It gives them a very special status. And actually these chief scientists, they are only 2 levels below me. So they have a very short communication up to the top, which you need to have, that you can take them out of the normal corporate processes, because, yeah, I'm a corporate man, most probably. You take them out there, you need to have a different way up that they can actually make sure that their breakthrough ideas are actually heard and seen.
Just so you all know, Shell has 100,000 employees in 100 countries. And you've identified 7,500 who are sort of roaming around, keeping that culture continuous in the organization. Take these chief scientists in these different areas. That's a sort of a build operation. Can they buy also? In the sense of, can they go out and buy the best talent in whatever that technology area happens to be? And does that cause disincentive inside the firm? Is that disruptive in a negative sense because you're buying in? And how much do you want to buy in as opposed to build?
I think it's very clear a company like Shell cannot hire all the smartest people on this planet. So we need to work with the outside world. We need to work with other companies, with the academics, etc. Otherwise, we will not succeed. So everybody is encouraged to actually stick their neck outside into the wind, into the external world, and actually bring ideas, bring teams into Shell. So they're encouraged to do that. And they do actually see this as a challenge, but also enlightening for them, because they can work with the most creative minds in the world rather than just in Shell. So actually this is being done on a very regular basis. Let me give you an example how we do this. A few years ago, we set up a program which is called Game Changer. This is a website where internal and external people can actually come up with ideas into Shell. We then use seed money to actually drive these ideas. Roughly half of them are coming from students and from professors. The other half is from outside firms, third-party firms, and from Shell people. We go up to proof of concept, and then we decide if we take this into Shell, finance it, and drive it, if we actually spin it off, or we sell it. So over the last few years, we have put $250 million into these kind of ideas. And today, 40% of our upstream R&D efforts are based on these early ideas, which came in from the outside through Game Changer.
So you're a private equity firm?
In a way, yes. Not as big as some private equity firms.
$250 million.
But we capture them very early, but very early.
Early stage.
Well, early stage, and we give them also our technical know-how. So we try to actually add 1 and 1 together in order to get 3 in that sense. So we start to mix that, and it has given us great success.
Now, if I had 4 of your Shell employees out here who are more sort of entrepreneurial minded, and so you just heard him speak, and I could take him aside and say, now tell me how it's really going on there.
Today, they would still say to you, Shell is complex, big, bureaucratic, slow.
That wouldn't surprise me.
No, doesn't surprise me either. So then the next question is, what do you do about it?
I'm not being interviewed, you are. How do you stop that?
Yeah. We realized that over the last few years that we have to change the culture in all of these areas. Now, you cannot change the DNA of a company. You can only adjust it in a way. So last year, we have gone through a major reorganization. I was driven by the vision that long-term, Shell can only survive through being top-notch on technology, R&D, innovation, then technology, evolution, and deployment. So what I did, I brought all the R&D, all the technology folks, and all the project folks who use these technologies together into one business. So I took them away from the businesses in order to drive. These are roughly 12,000 people out of the 100,000 people. So they drive now innovation, then the application of it, the deployment of it, and then actually drive the technology into value. And this, in my opinion, was the only way to make the decision processes shorter, to actually give them the power to simplify the processes, simplify the corporate life, accelerate corporate life, and actually get to a faster, more entrepreneurial, to use your word, environment. Are we there yet? Not yet. Half a year is not enough, but we are on the right track.
Do they control the funds and say, I like that one, we're going to invest in that, or does that go to the board? Or do they control those funds? What I call the private equity funds, in quotes.
Yeah. The board does get a technology strategy and a plan which covers 5 to 10 years. And then actually I agree and give the R&D and the technology budget to them, and then they can allocate themselves. So I just give them the top number and the direction through the strategy quite clearly. Let me also use a learning example here, which is important. At the end of the 90s, the oil price was $10. And Shell reacted to that by slashing technology spend, slashing investments, and moving people out. And we paid the price for that the last few years, because we had to rebuild this all, because it comes back. We all know cycles, they pass, and you have to grow again. This time, we went much better prepared into the downturn. We have the highest in the industry, the highest R&D budget. We have the highest capital expenditure budget. So we are going through the cycle in order to get better out at the end of it. So therefore, I've given them the same budget, because I think it is now, in the downturn, the most important time when your innovation and technology drive needs to function. You can buy it cheaper out there. Yeah, that's one driver. And the other one is you can also get people. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people want to go now into the bigger companies where they can actually achieve things.
Now, your industry, the energy industry, has a very long time horizon. Most investments take 10 years to realization. Some take 15, 20 years. They have a lot of zeros after them, after the first digit, usually the multiple billions. They all have huge risk associated with them. And some of those are short-term risks, some of those are long-term risks. But just take a decision, and we don't want to get into discussion of what happened there, but in the Gulf of Mexico, a major experiment, in a sense, with technology, drilling down a mile below this, a mile into the bed of the seabed, and then below that, this is like going to outer space, actually, to Mars. It's so sophisticated, but accidents happen. When you're doing multi-year investments for billions of dollars, which that was actually, how do you get them to say, I'm going to take these risks and feel comfortable taking the risk? We all know an accident can happen, but what kind of procedures do you put in place without stifling the entrepreneur or the creative thinker, the innovators, from driving these technologies, which a lot of them we don't know where they're going because they're so early stage. We have to actually drive them. How do you work around that risk management notion, but encourage the dynamic of creativity and the disruptive technologies for which we don't know the repercussions yet?
Mm. I think you keep them for a while apart before they become the very big projects, so that you can actually get them to commercialization. So typically what we drive on the risk side, the technologies which we want to actually develop, they go through beta stage, they go through kind of demo plant and then commercialization plants before we take them into the wider arena. And up to that point, actually, the businesses have not that much to say for that. So that is driven by very special leaders who are responsible for these kind of innovations. Once the technology is ready, so I give you an example. One of our chief scientists with one of these groups came up with the gas to liquids process, which takes gas into synthetic diesel. Now, they worked on this 15 years. And then he came up with a big project. So we knew it is working in the small scale. Now we can take it to the large scale. And then obviously you get other short-term, medium-term risks like political stability, financial risks, oil price. Tell me the oil price in 30 years' time, these kind of things. And then, but you have actually mitigated some of the technology risks. But you build into your plans that your technology will obviously further evolve. Now we are building one of these GTL plants now in Qatar, and that's an investment of $20 billion. So when you come from 10,000 barrels to 300,000 barrels, what we do there is a factor of 20 in terms of money as well. So you need to have these stages technology stages, before you go into the big one. So we will not go into a $20 billion with something which has not been proven in a commercialization plant.
The normal entrepreneur that we've been hearing, not normal, I won't say this, a lot of the entrepreneurs are in low asset cost businesses, which is a real advantage. And often the things that your folks may be coming up with, there are multiple billions. You just said $20 billion. And even then, sometimes we don't know if it's going to be $20 billion or not. Some projects have the opportunity to be twice the initial budget estimates. That's kind of scary for the board, but also that entrepreneur who knows this hasn't been done before. Anything you haven't done before, it's very unlikely you're going to be on budget. How do I address that issue to go in and convince you that this is going to work, first of all, because we go through a demonstration, but the budget will be pretty close. How do we approach that issue with me, who's really, I'm ready to go on this technology?
I think the one thing you forgot in the middle, we may be also nationalized, and therefore you lose everything. So that's another risk which we have. So a few examples around the world at the moment. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. In a business like ours, where you spend $30 billion every year, like we do on capital investments, you have a big asset business which needs a lot of funds to be built, but a lot of funds then also to be maintained. And that's where normally the smaller entrepreneurs cannot develop these things. And that's where the partnership between Shell and these kind of external firms becomes very important. Because at one stage, with our financial power, with our technical expertise, we have to come together and come in. And the same I apply actually internally. If I have someone with the idea, I give him maybe $500 million to build a commercialization plant, but then we need to bring it into the bigger businesses in order to actually carry the 20 billion. So therefore, we have a similar process like we do with externals, also internal, because otherwise you will actually take the wrong decisions at the wrong time. But let me be very clear. Our business is a high-risk business. You have to live. And my people always ask me, how do you sleep at night? I still sleep okay. But at the end, we have so many risks from a political, fiscal, technology, environmental, sustainable development risk. It's a big challenge, and it's fun to have all of this, but you cannot eliminate all risks. And hence the technology risk is 1 of 10. We have to live with it.
We've heard a lot the past day and a half about failure. Entrepreneurs need to fail. I think up to a point. I'm more a believer of the philosophy of a famous hockey player in North America called Wayne Gretzky, which is you miss every shot you don't take. And that's different from failing. How do you reward failure? How do you encourage failure in the sense of taking the shots?
Yeah.
And not going to get them all, but how do you reward that?
I think quite clearly you cannot reward this compared like we take the failures on safety or on other operational issues. You need to find a different mechanism, because out of 10, maybe 8 are small achievements, maybe 1 is big, maybe 6 will fail, And you need to make sure that this is an acceptable outcome. And I can tell you, you can write and have a vision and a policy, and this is all nice on paper. But the only way to do this, you walk the talk. You need to be out as a leader, and you need to make sure that high-risk R&D is something the company wants. The company sees as a differentiator, because out of these things, 2 or 3 may fly, and they may change our life in the longer term. And I think this is only done by really having short communication lines to me and walk the talk. You can write books about it. They will not believe you until the moment you show it actually what you mean.
Unless you do it, they won't do it.
No.
Without question. Walking your talk is really quite important. In an oil company, I'm talking about oil company now, because you're an energy company, but an oil company or a gas company, you may have 10 prospects to drill. And if you have 2 come in, you're done really well. I mean, really come in. If you have 1, you've done really well. In terms of this failure notion, taking all the shots we need to take, you put the same sort of ratios in your mind that the new technology areas should have, and maybe 2 out of 8 or 10 should work, like in oil investment opportunities, or do you try to make a difference between there because they're a different space and they're going someplace else we want to be in the future?
Yeah, I think it's a different space, but it helps in the mindsets of the leaders, because if you are used to exploration, where you have a success rate of 30 to 40% max, so every hole you drill, which is a dry hole, just for you that you know what that means a write-off of $200 million. And we drill kind of 90 to 100 holes a year. So it can be quite costly in that sense. But you get used to the notion, if you don't take risks, you will not be rewarded. I think on the technology side, you need also to distinguish about the small step innovation, which I think actually drives us forward in the longer term, versus the very high-risk innovation. And we do distinguish there. So I would say a 30-40% on the small issue innovation is something which is normal. For the big things, I think you are most probably in 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10.
I'm going to ask one more question. I'm opening to you, the audience, who's part of this discussion. But this is a difficult one. Don't name any names. But if I'm in the audience, I'm 25 to 30, I'm really ready to go. And I'm convinced I want to be in a large corporation. And I want to believe you, in Shell, that you're going to have those short lines. I'll be in the right place, and I can make sure that he's not listening there. I can go around him in the proper way to get the message up. Are you different from anybody else in the industry right now? Are they all the same? Are they all saying the same thing?
I think if you walk around the world, and you ask them who actually, those companies, national oil companies and governments who work with international oil companies, you will hear our name always as number 1 in terms of innovation and technology. This has been always our strength. We have maybe from time to time not been the fastest in implementing. We talked about complexity, etc. But technology-wise, we are recognized as the most entrepreneurial company and the most driving company. We have the highest budget. We have the highest number of R&D people. And I think this gives us the market reputation. We have the highest numbers of patents in the industry. So this shows you that we actually believe that this will change our life in the long term. So I invite all of you, you can ask me, but you can ask whoever you want to ask. I'm pretty sure you will get the same message back.
I've obviously been much too soft in the conversation. I like what I've heard, though. Who has a question in the audience? There must be a few. Right here in the 3rd row. He's down here. Put your hand up so they can see you. This is a young entrepreneur.
Hi, my name's Louis Barnett. I'm a young entrepreneur. I started my business nearly 6 years ago now, and I'm actually, I think, the youngest in the room. I'm 18. But I just wanted to ask, because I've actually been involved in Shell Livewire. I do a lot in the UK for entrepreneurial programs, and Shell are likened to Virgin, I think, as one of the absolute pioneers in innovation. And while you've been speaking, you've spoken nothing but less than entrepreneurialism and innovation constantly. And from a big corporation, is it, I think Virgin's innovation comes from the right management structure, but from a big corporation, where does that ideal come from? Is it you leading it, or how do you structure really building that innovation in a large corporation and actually keeping it and growing all the projects?
I think you need both. You need the leadership leading it and walking the talks, actually not just putting the words out, but putting the budgets in, but also give them what I described, the short lines, etc. That's one key one. But the other one is also that the businesses, those who manage the operations every day, actually buy into that concept and are pulling the innovation bit into their businesses. If you can't create that, so then you have not the right culture. And let me be very clear, in big companies, it is the best and the most comfortable way to make your career is actually to manage your business, as unchanged as possible, or with small changes, because that's the base which we need in order to go forward. And they will make their life, but this will not pull the company up into the next league. And that's what we as leaders have to do. But we have got business leaders who think the same way, and you need those two, otherwise it will not work. If you just think that you can have the top guys running around with that, that's not going to work. You need the pull effect, otherwise it doesn't work.
And don't you have to have a reward system that shows the walk the talk, and the follow that talk is rewarded, so they actually get something for actually doing it and not feel threatened too much by not keeping that base where it should be?
If you mean about reward, non-monetary reward, then that's the way we do it. We don't actually drive it, and I don't want to disappoint all those guys who are here in the room who think now they can be the billionaires with Shell. That's not the way we work. We reward through success and then the application and the deployment of it. So for this chief scientist who has had this GTL idea, there's nothing better in Shell than the reward that we are building this technology into a $20 billion plant. That's what drives innovation. It's not the remuneration in Shell.
There's a couple of questions here. A microphone come down to the front on my left-hand side. There's a couple in the front, and then we'll go about midway on this side. Any questions in the middle and the right side? Keep your hands up. We'll make sure we have microphones near you so we can go back and forth. Go ahead, on my left-hand side.
Hi, my name is Rajan Makijani. I want to congratulate you for managing to sleep well. I have often wondered that what kind of a job would it be to be at the helm of something that is sometimes regarded as environmentally degrading, working with rogue governments, and sometimes dealing with all kinds of things that come with rogue governments, influencing policy in developing and developed worlds, which is perceived sometimes not very favorably. So with all of this, how do you deal with this as a company? What are the practical considerations that you have to do as an entrepreneurial company, if you may, which at a different level sometimes an entrepreneur also has to deal with when working in developing economies?
Let me first share the challenge we have in the energy industry, and it's actually the biggest challenge, in my opinion, on Earth today. We have to supply energy we have to double it for the next 40 years because of the emerging developing world growing very fast. But we have to do it also at the cost to the environment, which is very lower, which is the sustainable development part you bring as well. And I think this gives us two challenges, which for any person actually is a great challenge, because you need the innovation, you need the entrepreneurial spirit, but you also need corporates to go after it. Because I also firmly believe, and it's a role for Shell, to help emerging countries to actually form their legal systems, their tax systems, bring education, bring actually local content to these countries. Wherever we operate, we have up to 90–95% of staff are actually local staff. So we see this as a key deliverable from our side to the sustainable development of those countries. And this may not always be happening the first 2-3 years. It may take 10 years. That's okay. We are there. But also I have to say, and that's where the risk management comes into it, we want to have a win-win situation. We cannot do this if we are not paid for the risks which we are taking. And that's the problem we have from time to time across the world, that the cake which is shared is not shared in the right way, and then you have to make certain decisions, and you don't go in there and work in certain countries. But otherwise, I think operating in 100 countries and having investments of the size we do is an enormous challenge, and we are up to it and prepared to help the country to make these steps as well.
We're going to take a question here to the right, on my right-hand side, and then we'll go back to the left-hand side.
Let him, he has
a follow-up?
Yeah, just very quickly. To make it very sharp and provocative, many a times in your business, I suppose, you have the opportunity of what I call legal arbitrage. There's a dictator out there, and if you can make him happy, there's a lot of profit you can make. Yeah? And that's a choice at a very different level an entrepreneur is confronted with in different contexts. How do you deal with that?
We have implemented our business principle in '76, and if you open that door only that much, your door is open that much that you can walk out of the company. No compromise at all on this. We have our ethics, we have our systems, and we have walked away more than once from countries and or politicians or others who didn't actually follow this one. Long term, it pays that you actually be very restrictive on this and very clear, because this word will go around the world. We have seen this.
Hello, my name is Vitaly Vorenkov. I'm a graduate student at the University of Oxford, and I'd like to ask you the following question.
Where are you?
Where do you sit?
Where are you?
Oh, there, okay, thanks. I only heard you, so.
Maybe I should be more excited in my voice. What's your view of the world's energy mix in 50 years? And what's your view on entrepreneurship in green energy companies, given that they might cannibalize your current earnings base?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our base assumption is by 2050, the energy demand has doubled, that fossil resources, which are making up 85% today of this energy mix, will still be around 60% by 2050, but with a lower CO2 content. It's clearly an evolution which will come. Why so high would be most probably your question. We think that actually industries will not be capable of doubling the demand and at the same time from 2% alternative energies today go to 40. There is a limit on how fast this can develop. So this is our base scenarios. Now, some areas in the world will be faster, will have a different percentage. Some others it will take a little bit longer. On average, and I know some will challenge that, and we challenge ourselves as well, on average, to gain 1% market share in the energy industry globally, you need from R&D to that 1%, you need normally 25 years. It's a normal technical cycle because of the big asset investments you have to do on a global scale. Can we bring that down to 20 or 15? We are working on that. But that's the base assumption which we have taken. So huge growth on alternative energies, but it will still most probably cover only 40%.
Where are the microphones? On my left-hand side, there are two hands up, and the microphone comes down here. We have two hands. We'll take these 4 questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll see how we're doing for time. So take can you stand up so we can actually see you when you get your hands up? We have 2 here and then 2 more out there.
Hello, Tobias Bedeker, London School of Economics. Can I read the following statement to you that Jerome van der Veer made last year in March? I don't expect them to grow much at Shell from here due to portfolio fit and the returns outlook compared to other opportunities. This is him talking about Shell reducing investments in renewables such as wind power, hydrogen, and wind, solar, and hydrogen to 0. Could you please comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah. Let me talk it in the following way. What I just outlined in the longer term, we have to supply fossil resources over the next 30, 40 years, and that's where we need to invest. We are investing in gas, which is 70% lower in CO2 than coal, because gas, we have 250 years of resources in the world. Gas is the one which can bridge us into renewables energy. Shell will be more gas by 2012 than oil. And I look at this as an alternative energy stroke renewable contribution. So that's where a lot goes in. What Jeroen said last year, we have concentrated on alternative energies and renewables in 2 or 3 areas. In the past, we had a policy of building on 5, 6, or 7. But I'm not keen on a fragmented approach. I want a very determined approach. And this is gas, biofuel second generation, and wind, and hydrogen. That's what we are doing at the moment, apart from low carbon fuels, standards, etc., which we are implementing. I don't believe that you should actually play on 20 different solutions. You should concentrate where you think you can make a real change.
Now the lady on my left, straight across. And were the 2 hands that were here in the middle? One here. You have the microphone. You'll be next, and then you.
My name is Sophia Wong. I'm currently studying at London Business School. I understand it is extremely difficult to push for change in large organizations, as people would easily fall into the mental fallacy that if it aren't broke, don't fix it. I wonder, in your opinion, how do you think a large company can create a sense of urgency for change, even if the company is doing well? Thank you.
Yeah, I was facing this situation last year. We had 4 years of every year new record profit. But I still had the feeling one needs to change in order to be ready for the future. I think the key is you keep the change as short as possible. Our last reorganization in Shell has taken 2.5 to 3 years. When I announced my one, I said I give you exactly 6 months, and we have done it. And I gave 3 deadlines in the middle of the 6 months. And we actually pushed through, and it was done by early January, exactly as indicated. And by the way, I've asked 15,000 people of my top leaders to reapply for their job. So nobody was actually safe, in the sense that I wanted the best person to get actually into the right job. So you can do it. You need to really drive it from the top, set clear expectations, and relentlessly actually drive it. Has the culture changed? No. That's what we are doing now. But you need to keep the change uncertainty as short as possible. And it's doable even if you are rather successful. We had a very successful profit year last year again. So you can't use the burning platform that you don't have profit or losses. You need to come up with something else, which is the long-term vision, where you want. You want to be attractive. You want to be actually competitive in terms of performance. And that's where I was driving it. This becomes an investor meeting at the moment, so this is good.
I told you they're good questions.
Yes, hi, I'm Willy from Switzerland. My question is back on the topic that has been raised earlier on what's going to be the next big transition. We've heard that Shell has been a shell company, an oil company. Is Shell going to make that next big transition? And more specifically, if you do that, what key performance indicators are you going to look at before they matter? Once the trajectory of improvement of the technologies, of the new technologies is good enough so that they have grid parity, it's probably too late. When will you look at key performance indicators that are likely to matter in that future state of the world where the logo is probably going to be a tree or a flower instead of a shell? Mm-hmm. And what capabilities do you plan to build up for that future state of the world, whether it's in 20 years or 50 years or 70 years?
Okay, no, thanks. Extremely good question, because that's what drives our lives at the top on a constant basis. So how do you actually structure your long-term strategy, and what do you need to do now in order to get there? So quite clearly, we are transforming Shell into a gas company, as I already said. We are taking big steps into biofuels, which we see as the one renewable energy which can be done, because we have things already now and make a big contribution the next 20 years before some of the other alternatives like battery-driven, etc., become more viable. So we are constantly going into these areas. You asked an interesting question about how you measure the performance, but also how you actually can be ahead of the rest of the pack. I use just one example, what we do in Shell. Some 25 years ago, we started to develop our gas strategy. And we were the pioneers of liquefied natural gas. So that the world will go gas started in Shell some 20 years ago. And we are now there, and the world is going gas. Now, do you get all of them right? No, so don't take it the wrong way. But 10 years ago, we started to include in all of our investment proposal a price for CO2. So no project was done if it's not sustainable when the world will charge a price for CO2. And today, after Copenhagen, after all the discussions, you know where the world will go. It will go into a CO2 world. If I look at our scenarios, what you commented, they are called Scramble. That's one of them, and we have various. We look at them. They don't drive our detailed strategy, but they give us the big picture, and we try then to measure up against that big picture. So we take these performance indicators rather early into account. These are more the macro ones. This is not how much return, how much capital you need. That's a different discussion. And that's, I think, you need to be open for that. I'm looking at the moment at Shell post-2025. And this is quite frustrating as a CEO from time to time. Let's be very clear, because I work for my next 3 successors. I actually don't work for me today. Yeah? Now my board, and I have a board member sitting here with Joe Ackerman, my board doesn't believe me always, but that's actually what it is. I work for the next 20 years, 25, that's what it is.
Go ahead, last question. Okay. I can always repeat it.
Test. Oh, hello. My name is René Bonsack. I'm from the Amsterdam Business School. And I have the following question. The topic here is being an entrepreneur, but being an entrepreneur also means that sometimes you have to have long breath. But being a corporation with shareholder pressure, it is sometimes difficult to push through technological projects. So in that sense, how can corporations have long breath? How can they protect technology projects? Do you do it? And if so, how do you do it?
This is quite clearly a pressure point you have, but I think this is up to the top management, the CEO, to drive that. You need to convince your shareholders that you are in a long-term business. If you invest for 30 years in projects, you need to have your innovation, your technology drive. You need to have the right people, and you need to invest in that. Yes, you have your quarterly reviews, and I always say to the politicians, at least they get only every 4 years to the polls. I go every quarter to it, but that's fine. We can work with that. I can absorb that. But the underlying strategy is very important. This has to be long-term in the energy. Does it give frictions? Yes, absolutely. But when you do cost, we did a big cost exercise the last 9 months. Upfront, I declared safety, asset integrity, asset maintenance, and technology spend out of bounds. So you save on the other side. If someone wants to reduce, then they better come and see me. So I think you need to be very clear strategically that certain things are just going to be driven in a different way. And yeah, I do not mind if travel costs come down by 40%. That's fine. That's what we should drive. But I don't want technology spend to come 40% down, because in 5 or 10 years' time, we will have a gap in our pipeline. This is not going to work. But this, I always say, that's why we get a salary. So we have to have good, wide, bright shoulders, and that's for what we are paid. You know?
Well, thank you, the audience, for your involvement, your engagement. Join me in thanking Peter for his great debate and discussion. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Let me just take a last word to make 2 comments about what you heard just now. which makes a large corporation have corporate entrepreneurialism. A vision, and Shell is not an energy company, it's a technology company. It's a vision, very important. And technology is changing and moving. And number two, you got to walk the talk. It comes from the top down, and change the structure shows a short line back up. Thank you all.
Thank you.